You're very welcome to this course on leadership communications, helping boost team engagement and performance. We'll be sharing tips, best practices and insights from over 20 years of working and supporting leaders in organizations. So if you're a CEO, a people leader, a manager or supervisor, it's never been so important or crucial to grasp the fundamentals in terms of engagement and communication to help boost performance, particularly during times of change. And so much so that Deloitte have a report from a survey completed with organizations where organizations have stated that 70% of them believe that adapting to change is critical to survival. It's not a nice to have anymore, it is critical to survival, but only 30% of organizations feel ready to do so. Hi, I'm Gary Neville and I'm a leadership communications and engagement strategist. I'm like a translator helping organizations translate strategic initiatives into clear and compelling communications to better engage and connect with people working in the organization. For over 20 years, I've been working in brand strategy and marketing communications. And during that time, my own journey as an entrepreneur has really shifted from being entrepreneurial driven to more purpose led. And that's connected back to experiences for me, particularly in school. To give you context, I'd love to share just two examples. The first is when I was in school, I was told academically I wasn't good enough. I needed to leave school and get a trade. I felt disconnected and I felt like I didn't belong in that structured academic environment. The second example is standing on stage in front of a full audience to recite a poem. I was so fearful of forgetting one word and put so much pressure on myself that I forgot the entire poem and was ushered off the stage. So helping people leaders today build their confidence to be better presenters, communicators, so that they can engage their people and teams better. And on the flip side, it's about really ensuring people feel like that they belong, that they feel part and connected to the vision, the purpose, or whatever the strategic initiative is really important to me. I hope that the information in this course is helpful to you and to your organization. And if you like what you see, please do subscribe, save the link, and thank you. I truly hope that the insights that we share today at least provides a platform for conversation within your own organization, that it improves or boosts leaders' confidence in their own ability to lead and connect with their teams, that ultimately boosts performance. Today we will be covering the 3C's of our leadership communications framework, and those 3C's include clarifying the strategy, creating the communications, and connecting with others. So let's get into it. So let's begin with clarifying the strategy. When we look at leadership communications, ultimately success begins with clarity. And when we talk about strategy, we could be talking about anything from your vision, mission, values and behaviors, your employer value proposition, or even any strategic initiative you're looking to roll out in your organization. It's about gathering the right people around the table, your key stakeholders like your senior leadership team or your heads of department, but it's also vitally important to include the wider cohort or a representation of the wider employee cohort, because better alignment and better engagement in terms of your strategy means a more successful strategy. Why that's important? Harvard Business Review reports that better employee alignment with a strategy results in 50% higher productivity. Not only does a lack of clarity or alignment in your organization reduce productivity and performance, if your people are unclear or feel a little rudderless in the organization, it's going to impact your reputation as a company. And when we look at the two different lenses, or to consider the lens of the person that's looking to join your organization. Look at the talent. What are they looking at in terms of reputation? What are the signals that they'll be looking out for? In terms of the other lens or perspective, you're looking at customers or partners that are considering buying from you or joining your organization or partnering your organization, again, they will be looking for signals. And when we talk about brand reputation, there's a strategic advisor in America called Marty Neumeyer, and I love his statement about brand reputation. He says that a brand is your reputation. It's a person's gut feeling about a product, service, or organization. And there's lots of data to support this as well. For example, Talent Now states that 85% of people look at your reputation as an employer when considering to join your organization. And 80% of senior executives will use social media to research your organization before making a purchasing decision. So they're looking for these signals. They're looking for the company culture signals. They're looking for employee advocacy signals.
When you're looking to develop or review a strategic initiative, the starting point will always be with the corporate brand, where your vision, mission, and your values will influence both the customer brand and the employer brand. So if you're not clear on these aspects of the business, then ultimately that is your starting point, particularly the values, because the values impact how your brand or organization is perceived, both internally and externally, from a customer value proposition point of view and an employer value proposition point of view. It's why customers choose to buy from you, and it's also why people choose to join and stay with your organization. Your values have a major part to play in those decisions that people make. So it's really important to look at that when you're developing a strategic initiative. We've highlighted the importance of clarity and alignment, and this is where we help businesses identify their core values and behaviors through facilitated sessions and group discussions. And I'm going to be sharing some of those exercises we use to define the values and behaviors that embody the prioritized values. But remember, the reason we're doing this is because, just like a tree, it's not possible to grow taller unless the roots grow stronger. So identifying your values and behaviors that can be applied in everyday practices to support your strategy is absolutely key. We use a values postcard exercise with businesses where in the group everybody picks 2 cards each to represent a value they feel is a right fit for their business. We then partner people up into one-to-ones where each person takes a turn to explain what the value card represents and why it matters, while the partner actively listens and notes those insights. We then present back to the wider group, where the group works together to define the values and the values themes. We also have a behaviours exercise and ask the question, what behaviours look like in action to support a specific value? So when we look to role model this value at work, what kind of behaviours could the individual demonstrate? From a team perspective and supporting others, we ask, what behaviours could you demonstrate to support others do their role and live the value at work? And finally, from a business perspective, in terms of supporting the business, how can you ensure this value helps deliver the business objectives? When supporting clients on strategy, there are a number of models that we look to use, one of which includes the 3-box model, which I hope you find useful. There's a number of key steps that we take in this particular model, the first being define your focus area. And in that, there's a number of boxes that we cover off. The first is managing the present. During this process, we ask a number of key questions to agitate conversation and create more discussion around what are the key actions that we need to identify that will help us, for example, in this case, optimize current operations and maintain current business performance. In box 2, we ask a number of questions related to letting go of the past. For example, here it's all about what do we need to identify that no longer serve the organization anymore. And in box 3, it's all about creating the future. Again, asking questions to create more conversation and to get insights from key people within the room, and then define a number of key actions that will help long-term success for the business. Step 2 is all about prioritizing and planning over a period of time, in this case 3, 6 and 12 months. And finally, step 3, it's about communication and engagement. Again, how do we connect the top-down directives to bottom-up engagement? What are the key actions that we can do to create a more connected and engaged working environment?
So that brings us to the second C, which is creating communications. So we've agreed on the strategy, but if the strategy isn't translated into clear and consistent communications, we're going to end up with the case of Chinese whispers, because without a consistent and shared language, even the best strategies will fail. We use several communications tools to help translate that strategic initiative into clear communications. And we will be also adding more resources to this particular YouTube channel for people to download and to access. So be sure to subscribe and to like this particular course for future reference. We're also going to be adding a playbook from the content created within this course for people to download for free. So hoping that that's going to be helpful as well. But ultimately, when we're talking about clear communications, we're talking about making the communications as sticky and as memorable as possible. And in my view, it shouldn't be any different than a consumer-facing brand. If you think of Nike, Just Do It, or Apple, Think Different, and the visual cues and the communications that they use to make their message as sticky and as memorable as possible, why don't we take the same approach when developing a strategic initiative for employees to remember and to connect with within the organization? So 2 key resources we will be covering in this particular area will be the communications grid and the leader's cheat sheet.
So when we look at building these communications, we look at the communications grid, which in actual fact can be split into 3 simple areas. The first is the core positioning. What do you want that strategy to be most defined for or known for? The second is, what are the key message pillars or supporting messages that will support that core positioning? And then the third is, what are the tailored messages that need to be created depending on the audience that you're actually speaking to? So for example, if developing a site strategy and one of the strategic business priorities is new, innovative, quality products, then specific messaging will be built around that for shipping and packaging, for example, within your organization, that will all add to delivering that core positioning. So your communications grid becomes a reference guide for people leaders to use more consistent communications when engaging teams. And there's a methodology or a process around how we build these communications. And I want to walk you through a couple of those steps right now. So the first is, we actually work from a bottom-up perspective. We look at identifying a number of the key message pillars first of all, but we look in each of those message pillars to define a number of the supporting key messages, and that then helps us develop a narrative or a summary for each of the key message pillars that ultimately feeds back up the system to create the overarching core positioning. Imagine for a second all of your people leaders had a one-page cheat sheet just like Adidas have for their employer value proposition. Adidas have a core positioning which is based on shape the future of sport, which is very much connected to their overarching purpose. They also have a number of key message pillars that support that core positioning. And again, in the case of Adidas, these are actually engagement drivers for people who might be attracted to want to work in an organization that have these supporting messaging pillars. The reason this is all so important is because effective communication can actually improve employee understanding and support by 85%, as reported by Gartner.
And that brings us to our third C, which is based on connecting with our people. So if we think for a second what we've covered so far, we have clarified the strategy, we've created clear communications, and now it's a case of bridging the gap between top-down directives and bottom-up engagement. We need ways to connect with people who are working in different functions, areas, and sites maybe. So whether it's a case of walking the floor, daily stand-ups, weekly meetings, whatever it might be, we need to figure out how do we connect with people to create better engagement. But before we answer that question, I'd like you to consider 3 other C's from a good friend of mine, Stephanie Prendeville. Stephanie is an organizational development consultant, and she's worked with many organizations through transformational change. And Stephanie's 3 C's are capacity, capability, and culture. The first C, capacity. Is there a capacity for growth and change in your organization? The second C is capability. Is there a skills capability requirement in your organization with people leaders? And the third is there a culture of enablement within your organization? So what are the fundamental skills needed for people leaders today? Well, we've found a couple of fundamentals we'd love to share with you. The first is defining the appropriate communications, the channels, and the resources needed to sustain your communications. And the second is, of course, the human skills or the transversal skills needed by people leaders in order to connect and engage teams.
Having a communications framework can be very helpful in terms of connecting messages to people who are working in different functions in the business. For example, you could have direct labour, indirect labour, production and associates all working and consuming information in very different ways. In this example, we look at a weekly communications briefing, and what's important to consider here is what's the type of information that's most going to engage people in that team. It really is down to the right type of information in front of the right people in the right channel. When it comes to sustaining this type of communication, in this example we look at people leaders who are creating or agreeing the communications, and then for supervisors to cascade that information down. And ultimately why we're doing all of this is really to help people feel more connected and valued within the organization. Each organization will of course have its own process depending on shift patterns and things like that, but ultimately there's a weekly cycle that should be embedded within this system. So this brings us to our micro support for people leaders. And over the past few years, we've worked with organizations where we've recognized that people working in one particular role who have been promoted to a people leadership role might lack some of the skills to effectively communicate with teams. The other concern or issue that I've seen is that people are very time poor and don't have time to attend lengthy programs, which is why we've developed the microskills support. Some of the content we're going to include today will include connecting with your audience, leading by example, and reflecting and summarizing.
Social psychologist Amy Cuddy is an expert in body language. And Amy asks a question when it comes to communication: is body language important? Well, the answer to that question is no, it's imperative, because we don't communicate with words alone. When we're unsure of the words, we rely on tone of voice and body language. These are the non-verbals. And if there's a mismatch between the words and the non-verbals, then we have a miscommunication. In fact, only 1 in 20 people use full dynamic facial expression. That means out of 20 people who are happy, only 1 person will show a happy face. The other 19, albeit happy, have a neutral facial expression.
Morabian's model and rule of communication really highlights and shows how important it is that it's not just what we say, it's how we say it. In fact, 7% of communication is based on the words that we use. I recently attended a client meeting where the senior leadership team was presenting the site strategy to over 40 people leaders across 2 sites. And there was a number of people leaders who presented a case study highlighting the fact that communications and structure probably had the biggest impact in terms of engagement. There were other key takeaways as well that I'd like to share with you, and it was really about the simple things. It was where people leaders actually were more visible and spent a bit more time learning about their people to build trust. It reminds me of another event I attended, which was hosted by the UL Chemie Business School and the Centre for Business Excellence. And at it, they were talking about the needs and skills needs for emerging leaders. And a senior leader who was presenting stated, "It's about being human and creating the connection," which really resonated with me. Leadership presence is also about leading by example. It's about having those weekly meetings consistently. It's about starting them on time and finishing them on time. You could also create moments of recognition, demonstrating words with actions, which is a great way to build trust and recognition within your team. The slight change in words can make a huge difference as well in terms of what we can do to support the strategy and our future. Empathy, of course, is a very big aspect in terms of team mentality, and creating a safe space for team members to share their frustrations or concerns, or using phrases like "I hear you," and being honest about limitations and being transparent is vitally important. Again, going back to the previous case study, it's about being human and about building trust. I'd love to share some word choice tips with you, but before I do that, I'd like you to consider a question. In your opinion, what do you think one of the top 3 reasons a person leaves a business? Well, according to Gallup, a manager's approach and leadership style is one of those reasons. So I'm going to share some tips that we include in our micro support for people leaders. So instead of using "but" at the end of a sentence, like "I like what you're saying, but," which can unintentionally dismiss or diminish what was said before it, consider using "I see your point. What are your thoughts on?" Or instead of using "What do you mean?" consider using "So if I understand you correctly." Or instead of using "Does this make sense to you?" which can unintentionally suggest doubt about the person's ability to understand, consider using "What are your thoughts on that?" or "How does that sound to you?" Being a better leader, of course, means being a better listener, which brings us to active listening. It's about encouraging conversation and asking questions that requires more than just a yes or no response. It's about using softening phrases like "Can you tell me more about?" It's about reflecting back on key points to ensure and to show that you've been active listening. Again, it makes people feel valued that you've heard what they've said. Of course, this is so important because active listening increases collaboration and productivity by 25%.
I'd like you to imagine a scenario for 1 second, and imagine 2 team leads. The first team lead walks into a meeting, rattles off updates, and leaves. No one has asked any questions or no one has spoken. No one feels connected. Engagement drops, people leave, and no matter how good the strategy, it falls flat. Now imagine the second team lead walking into the room and taking a moment to connect with his or her colleagues. Clearly aligning or connecting the vision or the strategy to the team, clearly communicating and opening up for conversation. This team lead doesn't just rattle off updates. This team lead creates a connection and builds trust. Which one will you choose to be? So as we wrap things up, I hope that some of the insights shared in this course have been helpful to you and to your organization. If you're launching a strategic initiative, that it has helped empower your people leaders to be better communicators, presenters, to better engage and connect with your people in various different teams. We will be adding more information and content to this YouTube channel, so please do subscribe to it, and by all means do leave a comment if you would like more information, or let us know what you liked about this particular course. Thank you very much.